So this is dealing with mental illness, or how I learned to dislike myself less. I don't really recognize any of you in here, with a couple exceptions. So I'm JD. I'm a Drupal technical architect. That's my title. Sounds a lot fancier than it is. If you want to find me on Twitter, if you want to tweet about this, I'm at JDDoesDev. All the Slacks, I'm Dorf. In case you just happen to stumble down the stairs, this is Chicago PHP meetup. And if you want to tweet about this as well, use the hashtag OSME. Now, who here other than Carl knows what OSME is? Okay, so I'm going to be talking about them a lot, like a lot. So I'll explain a little bit later, go into detail about what OSME is, or OSMI, and what they do. Now, I always like to start off with a big friendly hello. So, hi. Hi. Thank you for coming. Because it might get a little bit serious for a few minutes, but it's always nice to say hi. I also like to start by covering my ass. So one, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not a medical professional. I'm just a guy here to tell my story. I'm also not a legal professional. Those people make a lot more money than I ever will. I also tend to swear without thinking about it, so I'm apologizing ahead of time. If there's anybody who's easily offended, please let me know now and I'll make extra conscious effort to, okay, you're all and I'm also going to go into quite a bit of detail. So it might be a little bit uncomfortable, but it's about to get personal. This is the question, right? And I don't want to spark a philosophical debate that results in an existential crisis. I just mean, why are we here right now, today, in this place? And I'm here to talk with you about something very important to me. And I hope that it's important to you as well. I hope that you're here because we want to take part in a conversation, or at least maybe learn something, or free food. I'm also here to tell a story, and I hope that it helps someone the way another person's story helped me. And I'll get into that a little bit later as well. So let's have a conversation, but you guys go first. You're going to learn a lot about me. I want to get an idea of who I'm talking with. So how many of you are developers here to learn development, build sites, programming, stuff like that? Vast majority, okay. Are any of you project managers, project owners, account managers, anything along those lines? Okay. All right, wearing a couple of different hats it looks like. Are any of you in HR? Oh, good. Are any of you in upper management, managers, presidents, CEOs, higher level? Okay. Again, many hats. Not a bad thing. Now, for those of you who don't know me, I've given you my name, but I haven't really given you a lot more than that to go off of. So I have been doing Drupal and PHP for about 6 years now. I've been doing HTML since the 90s. AngelFire, GeoCities, that was my jam. I had all the best random numbers. I started learning BASIC and QBasic through, have any of you heard of a magazine called 321 Contact, or do any of you remember it, or a TV show? So my intro to programming was 321 Contact. The back page of every issue was a basic program on paper that you had to take and copy character by character onto your editor on DOS and hope that you didn't have any typos. I always had typos. It was never fun to debug, but it was a learning experience. I'm also one of the organizers of MidCamp. If you're not familiar with that, MidCamp is the Chicago Drupal camp, or Chicago area, Midwest area Drupal camp. I help organize the Chicago Drupal meetup as well, which we meet monthly, the first Wednesday of every month. And before I got into all this, I was a paramedic and a firefighter for about 10 years. So I've had a little bit of a change of life over the last few years. Also, in case you couldn't tell by the title, I have mental illnesses. Now, the big question is, why do I care about this? Why am I giving this talk? Why am I not just sitting at home saying, everybody else deal with it yourselves? Well, because people aren't alone. This isn't something that anybody needs to deal with by themselves. And there needs to be somebody having a conversation, or at least starting a conversation. For me personally, I suffered in silence for a long time. I was in denial about it. I was afraid admitting I had an illness would make it real. I didn't even see it as an illness. I saw it as a flaw. I saw it as weakness, damage. I also was worried that if I saw a doctor or if I saw a professional and they told me that I had something, that made it real. It's not You know, you're in perfect health until you go to a doctor and get the diagnosis that you're going to die in 10 days. Up until that point, you were great. I also worried that if I told people, that they'd treat me differently. If I told anybody how I was feeling and what was going on, they'd just look at me a different way. But something I need to tell myself a lot: I'm not weak, I'm sick. I'm not damaged, I have a disease, and it's not a choice, it's a condition. That's something that people have a hard time remembering. It's not something you could choose to, you could turn off and on. It's part of who somebody is. Now, I'm going to be talking a lot about mental illness. Otherwise, this would be a really, really short talk and you could all go home. But I want to define it. So, has anybody heard of the DSM-5? Yeah. So not that many people, but it's a book that's probably about yay high, you know, up to my waist, and it has very specific criteria of what is defined or what needs to be checked off before somebody gets a diagnosis. So the 5 at the end of it means it's the 5th edition. It evolves every few years. They come out with a new edition, and it's
psychiatry medicine.
Yeah.
It's a big medical book.
Like I said, it comes up to about my waist. But the overall definition of mental illness is it refers to a wide range of mental health conditions or disorders that affect your mood, thinking, and behavior. Now, that's pretty wide berth of things. For me, though, just what mental illnesses are you dealing with, you ask? Well, person I invented with this slide, I have major depression, I have anxiety disorder, I have PTSD, I have ADHD, and I have TBD. I'm one square away from mental health bingo, and I'm just waiting for that. And I say that because there's such a high level of comorbidity or coexistence between diagnoses that, you know, once you get 1 or 2, you just start collecting. And it's not like a badge of honor of, oh, I've got more diagnosis than you, or I've got, you don't have what I have, so you're not as suffering as me. But, you know, it's not unusual for these things to kind of snowball and grow. So I want to define these just for clarity. Major depression, not a soldier. Major depression is defined as feelings of low self-worth or guilt and a reduced ability to enjoy life, with symptoms that are present every day for at least 2 weeks. So that's what the DSM says about major depression. That's what defines it. Anxiety disorder. It's characterized by feelings of worry or fear that are strong enough to interfere with your daily activities. Now, this comes from one little tiny part of your brain, the amygdala, that little green thing there. And the color green is very, very apt because it's also referred to as your reptilian or your lizard brain. And it's basically your 4 base instincts come from right there. That little thing there, which are fight or flight or feed or breed. And when you have anxiety, that thing is telling you that something that most people can just walk into no problem wants to do the same thing to you that a hungry lion wants to do to you. Everything is out to kill you, and that your lizard brain just says, get me out of here. PTSD. This is a failure to recover after experiencing or witnessing a terrifying event. I didn't really understand how this worked until a psychologist I was seeing explained it to me in terms I could understand, and that's in computer hardware. So I want you all to think of your brain as a computer. Everybody there? All right, so you've got your short-term memory and you've got your long-term memory. You've got your RAM and your storage. Your RAM is right there hooked up to the CPU, changing information back really, really quick. You've got your storage. It takes a little bit longer to get it into the RAM to push it, you know, to be useful. When you have PTSD, something gets caught right in that short-term memory, right in your RAM, and it stays there. It doesn't move into the long-term storage. And sights, sounds, smells, anything can make somebody relive that event just by a small reminder of what it is. And part of the treatment is finding a way to move that from your short-term memory, from your RAM, back into your hard drive. Or maybe not back into it, but into it to begin with. ADHD, excuse me. This is varying degrees of hyperactivity, impulsivity, or inattention that lead to difficulty in academic, emotional, and social functioning. Now, when I was a kid, this was mainly, there's something wrong with that kid, but he just needs to go to his room, play video games, and out of sight, out of mind. Or need to burn off energy, or any number of other excuses that didn't involve getting treatment. Now, I realize that it's really affected my job, and well, I've only been getting treatment for a short time, relatively speaking. The last one, ADHD, I've only had that diagnosis for under a year because I finally found a therapist who was willing to listen to me instead of put me in front of a computer and say, here, play this game and it'll tell me if you have ADHD. If you're familiar with it, one of the symptoms is, in addition to a lot of not ability to focus, is you have periods of hyperfocus that you can't really control. We all work on computers. You put me in front of a computer, I can stare at that X until it goes away. But the second you try to hold a conversation with me, something's over here, something over here, everything is yelling for my attention. What did you just say? So, I found somebody who actually talked to me, which was great. It really helped out. So why do I mention that I've only been getting treatment for a short time? Well, remember when I said it's about to get personal? My normal was not normal. And when I say only a short time, I mean within the last couple years in general is when I got my first diagnosis and started getting treatment. For as long as I can remember, I felt the way I felt before I started getting treatment. And we could debate nature versus nurture all day, but there are some people who are predisposed, there are some people who are raised in environments that cause your brain to not build the way that it should build. To put it mildly, from a very high level, my childhood was rough. I was witness to a lot of physical and verbal abuse. Personally, I was emotionally abused, and that can take a lot of forms, and I went through most of them. I was left alone a lot, so I didn't really have that security net that most people grow with. And I also had a hard time making connections. I had very, very few friends, overweight, ugly, bad hygiene. I was bullied a lot, and I didn't know how to handle emotions, so I cried or I lashed out a lot. This went through, elementary school on. And I blamed myself. I thought it was my fault. I was defective, I was unlikable, I scared people away, and I never had that sense of safety, so I became afraid of everything. Everything was out to get me, which ties into that anxiety. But I had one enemy in particular. Everybody ready to meet him? The mirror. Every time I would look in this thing, that's all I saw back. Nobody likes you, I hate you. Every single day. I hated what I saw every time I looked in it. This is just what kept coming back to me. I couldn't understand how anybody could like me, how anybody would want to be around me. But it wasn't the mirror saying it, it was my reflection, so it was me saying it to myself. Getting out of the shower, going to the bathroom, anytime I saw a mirror, the words that usually came out of my mouth were, "You piece of shit," just normal. That was me. Most of my life. Sometimes I'd try to fake confidence, but it didn't always work. Sometimes I would act like things didn't bother me, but they did. Sometimes I would get angry. I was angry all the time, not sometimes, I'm lying. I was always angry. I was paranoid about everything, I was afraid of everything. I'd have deep valleys where I couldn't function for days on end. Like literally could not get out of bed, couldn't move. I just wanted to be left alone, and I pushed anybody who tried to come near me away, which would make me feel useless, be unable to function. Felt like I'd mess up everything I touch. I couldn't focus. And then when I got into the development world, I kind of dealt with it, but I was constantly in fear that I would lose my job because I couldn't focus to do my job. So they would eventually catch on that, hey, this guy's not doing that many pull requests, this guy's not pushing up enough code, maybe we need to get rid of him. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what was wrong with me. Before I got into development, I was in emergency services, public service. I was a paramedic, I was a firefighter. We're proud. We don't get sick, we help the sick. we don't get mental illness until we do. And I can name, takes more than one hand to count them, but people who I worked with who died of suicide because there just wasn't that support system. We're too proud to get help. But for me, something happened. No, more accurately, some things happened. I wish I could say it was my aha moment or an epiphany, but it wasn't. It was a series of events. I started my associate's degree in my late 20s, and I went to a community college because it's cheap. I wanted a degree, and I didn't want to be a firefighter or a paramedic anymore. I drove to school one day, sat in the parking lot. I didn't have a test. It was just math class, no presentation, nothing important, just every day. But every instinct of mine was telling me if I walk through those doors, I'm going to die. Something's going to attack me, something's going to kill me. That's just my lizard brain getting a hold of me and saying, run away. And I ran away. It was a full-blown panic attack. It wasn't the first, but it was the one that I finally questioned. And, is this normal? Do other people go through this? Then I changed careers. I got into development and I started hanging out in online developer communities, and fortunately, they aren't the dark side of the internet, so I was able to learn from people, and I started noticing ways that people would talk and the inclusiveness of developer communities. And everybody just seemed more understanding and more inclusive and more, hey, a lot of people going through stuff. What's up with you? How can we help? And that, realizing that, kind of the grass really was greener, I guess would be a good analogy. Then I had a health scare. To not go into too many details, I found a lump where there shouldn't be a lump and I got scared. It was nothing. Everything's okay-ish, as okay as I can be. But that had me reevaluating a lot of things, and this was hard. I accepted that I need help. I saw other people living happy lives and not going through the same things that I was, and that was difficult. People didn't get as angry as I did as easily as I did, and people weren't affected by everyday things the way that I was. I kind of had, if there was an epiphany, it was right around here when I kind of thought maybe everything else wasn't the issue, maybe it was me. Kind of that situation where if everywhere you're going smells like dog shit, maybe check your own shoes. And for a lot of people, this was the hardest part. All the signs were there, but I couldn't see them. I refused to see them. I was blind. I was constantly afraid. Like I said, I keep bringing this up, but it was a crippling fear of everyday things. The reaction I should have when a lion is chasing me to eat me is the reaction I had trying to walk into a supermarket. Social situations were paralyzing, so I would make plans and then I would cancel plans and get called an asshole for canceling the plans, but I was just paranoid. I couldn't do it. I wasn't a happy person. Anything could set me off. Again, that lizard brain. Fight or flight, feed or breed. If I can't eat it or make babies with it, I'm going to run away from it or I'm going to fight it. That's all that brain tells you. Being hateful was usually a misunderstanding, but I was angry and hateful sometimes. Not my proudest moment, but I was once so angry I threw a couch. Again, not my proudest moment, looking back on it, but I learned.
Window?
No, just across my basement. Then I realized that I'd been suffering and there was something I could do about it. I could listen to the wise Muppet. Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. It's true. And then I got treatment. It started with a therapist, which led to medication. And I am a big fan of better living through chemistry. I still see a therapist. I find outlets, things that can help me, things to do, doing this talk or similar talks at events, organizing events, being active in the open source community when I can. And I try to start the conversation by doing things like this. But it wasn't easy. So this is going to kind of be a question of who's been here the longest, but does anybody remember about 2, maybe 3 years ago when Ed Finkler did a talk at this? Yeah, figure you two would. So it was at the Nerdery, and that's a talk that changed my life. Literally changed my life. There was a very frustrating period for me, and this is just one of the many downfalls of the healthcare system of this country. But I was able to get into a therapist. And there are different levels of therapists, from social worker all the way up to psychologist, psychiatrist. But I live in Indiana. In Indiana, a psychologist cannot prescribe medication, but they can diagnose. So I got diagnosed, but I couldn't get prescribed medication that would help me. So basically they're saying, hey, you have depression, nothing we can do about it except talk a little bit, but your chemical levels are off and, you know, hope we can get through it. It was 6 to 8 weeks before I could get into a primary care physician who would be willing to write me a prescription. And it wasn't for, you know, anything controlled. It's Lexapro. It's SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, that basically tells your brain, hey, these chemicals are good. Don't try to suck them back up. Just let them go where they need to go. And Ed gave his talk to this group during that time, and he was an awesome set of ears for me to vent to after, and, you know, kept in contact, and that's kind of how I became involved with OSME. And it helped me realize something very important just by sitting in that talk, that one of the reasons I waited so long for treatment was because mental illness has a stigma around it, and that terrified me, to be part of that stigma, to be stigmatized. But now, I know we're not alone. Since getting diagnosed, getting rid of the stigma from my own brain, I've realized I'm not alone, which means we're not alone. Nobody is the only one going through this. And to kind of put it in a PHP way, you know, may have very different variables and methods, but the interface is always the same. Yeah, object-oriented, awesome. I realized that I was afraid because of the way people viewed me, or might view me, not necessarily the way that they did view me. And I don't feel that way anymore because of organizations like OSME. And so we've got two people who know what OSME is. OSME stands for Open Sourcing Mental Illness. It is an organization started by Ed Finkler, who lives in Lafayette, Indiana. He started about 5 years ago with the mission of opening the conversation in the tech community about mental illness and erasing the stigma. It's a nonprofit. We're all volunteers. Ed tried to take a salary for a while, but he ended up going back to full-time work. The people who run it are absolutely amazing. The volunteers are great, and I'm not including myself in that. Definitely including Carl, but
You're great.
So I'll talk a little bit more about OSME, but it's literally changed my life. I'm not exaggerating when I say that. So much that I got the logo on my arm. So after getting treatment, for one, I'm not ashamed of who I am. I wanted to hide before because of my conditions, how I felt, and how I thought people would think of, how people would view me, how people would think of me. But now I'm not too proud to admit that I need help anymore. The valleys aren't as deep as they used to be, and not to say that I don't still have deep valleys, but I can deal with them a lot better. They aren't as far down. The converse of that is I don't have as many, you know, riding high times when things are going amazing and my brain is just on fire accomplishing stuff. But, you know, being more in that middle means that I can have more productive time or more normal, quote unquote, normal time in between without having to be on the highs and the lows. My anxiety has gone down a lot, but it still shows up occasionally. And since getting on medication and seeing a therapist, I've become a lot more comfortable in social situations, obviously, because I'm standing in front of a bunch of strangers right now. I'm still introverted, so after this I'm going to need to hide for a little while. And I don't have nearly as many anxiety attacks or times when I'm unreasonably afraid of doing normal things. You know, I don't think a lion's going to attack me in the supermarket. And now I work with OSME. I volunteer. They help me go to different talks. They have been a great support network, just amazing people. And also, I can tolerate this thing a little bit more. If you can't read that, even though we don't agree on everything, you have some valid opinions and shouldn't be afraid to share them occasionally. I keep saying this. I mean this in general, but more specifically in the tech community. We're not alone. Now, why do I say the tech community? Why does OSME focus on the tech community other than the fact that most of the people who volunteer are developers or work in tech. Well, it's been suspected for a very long time that developers and people who work in tech suffer from depression or mental illness a little bit more than the general public. Some studies have shown that creatives appear to be more prone to depression and anxiety. There were sites, it used to be called devpression.com or devpressed. It was a forum, but OSME took over those forums, and now it's the OSME forums. And it was a lot of developers, people in the tech community just getting on, hey, I'm going through some rough times. Can anybody help me? Hey, somebody, this happened to me, what can I do? That was kind of all there was to go on. That and the thinking that intelligent and creative people overthink situations more than others. The way that our brains are wired, we look back and forth on the same thing over and over. I don't know about all of you, but especially me, if something doesn't work, just to bring it back to development. If I have a function that I know should be giving me this output and it's not giving me this output, I'm going to go back and forth over that. And every time you're kind of reliving that negative experience and you can't let go of it, you look for the cause and event, and because it's a negative experience, it replays, and it leads to feeling depressed or hopeless that you can't solve it. It just kind of a brain fatigue that you're not going to get the answer to this problem. There's also this little thing, I don't think anybody in here has heard of it, called imposter syndrome. Everybody has it, everybody to some degree. And TLDR, feeling you don't deserve to be doing what you're doing. I deal with it by saying thank you when somebody compliments me for anything, which is like light years ahead of what I used to be able to do. It used to be somebody said something nice, and I would just shake my head and walk the other way. I also see that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness. Before I used to think that, when I was a junior dev, mid-level dev, architect, asking for help is basically saying, I have no idea what I'm doing right here, somebody just call me out on it and fire me. But I don't see it that way. It's okay to have limits. And nobody's going to know everything about everything. And I'll give you an example right now. Which comes first, the needle or the haystack? Okay. Yeah, exactly. But can you tell me which function? Okay. We all have to Google something every once in a while, and that's okay. It's not wrong to ask for help, and it's not wrong to realize you have limits. But the biggest thing is, just the inability to take compliments, and I'm working on that. I'm not great at it, but I'm working on that. Okay, I've been going on for a while now. I've been talking a lot. I want to ask all of you some questions. You don't have to blurt out answers because it's not that kind, but you can nod if you understand, however you want to show. Would you tell someone with glasses or contacts to try looking harder? Okay. Would you ask someone in a wheelchair why they decided not to walk? Kind of seems like a jerk thing to say, right? Yeah. Would you tell someone with diabetes or a heart condition to just snap out of it? Don't take the meds, you don't need them. Again, silly. Let's do some replacement here. Would you tell someone with depression to try being happy? Would you ask someone in a panic attack if they've considered trying harder to not have anxiety? Have you ever thought of not freaking out? Have you ever told someone with ADHD to stop taking your medicine and just try harder to focus? Some people kind of put it out that way, though. They ask these kinds of questions where have you tried the natural route? Have you tried just being happy? Just smile. Or, we all go on the internet, and we all have probably seen these picture of a forest. This is an antidepressant. This is shit. Well, I don't take that exact med, but no, that's literally a lifesaver for me. We see this. I don't need pills to be happy. I do. And then, my favorite, you don't need antidepressants if you lift. These all say the same thing, that it's a decision to feel this way. And let me tell you, anybody who decides to feel this way is masochistic, because it is not a choice. It's saying that you don't need help, it's something you can just snap yourself out of. And I can vouch for the effects of medication. Now, I realize everyone is different. What works for me may not work for the next person, may not, be the same solution for you. Maybe lifting helps you, but don't shame somebody for not lifting and taking chemicals. And yeah, there are a few side effects, but the benefits overall outweigh those side effects by tenfold, at least. We have our own memes. If you can't read it, it says, if you can't make your own neurotransmitters, store-bought is fine. So, big question is, how do we erase the stigma around mental illness? Well, the best way to do it is to be stronger than fear. Now, what does this mean? I don't mean try to beat your fear at arm wrestling. I mean, start the conversation. Listen to people. Let people know that they matter, and don't be ashamed. If you do have mental illness, you're not damaged, you have a disease. Try to be respectful, too. Not all disabilities are visible. Not all cuts bleed. Try to be respectful of what you say or how you portray diseases. Saying that you're sad, or saying you're depressed when you're having a bad day is not the same thing as being actually depressed. Wanting to be organized is not the same thing as having OCD. I did a talk from Marketo, and the woman who went before me, I really don't like Marketo because they put me after her. Her talk was absolutely amazing. But she told her story of dealing with OCD, and the way that she told it was, imagine that you are allergic to blueberries. But everything in your brain is saying, if you don't eat a blueberry, everything you love will be destroyed. Everybody that you know will die. You have to eat that blueberry. That's OCD. Having to feel that compulsion that if you don't do this, the world is going to end. Not liking to have your desk organized. That's not OCD. And if you do feel that you have a disease, please get treatment. See somebody, talk to somebody.